Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Seahawks fans, welcome back to another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, here with Keith Myers. Today we're talking salary cap stuff, so it's going to be a very exciting show. We're talking all the finance stuff and the accountant things and the behind-the-scenes money dealing type things that go on in the NFL and how it's all going to work this year with COVID-19. We're going to talk about a big trade in the NFC West that has an impact on a division rival, and then we're going to get into the offensive coordinator spot with Shane Waldron. We're going to have that little discussion, and that's going to lead us into the salary cap portion of the show, which is our main event. So, without further ado, Keith, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. This has been a good week. It's been they finally got the offensive coordinator thing done. We now know why it took so long and feel good about how that went down. And
it's probably about as good as it could have gone.
Yeah, and it really turned out well for the team in a lot of different ways. And ultimately, I mean, the offseason's off to a good start. Let's just go with that. And there's still a lot of stuff to be done, which is why we have this show today, because it's going to set the scene for all the work that needs to be done. But The first big piece is taken care of.
Well, it's interesting because we've in the last couple of shows we've talked about the coaches last week, and then the prior show we talked about the roster evaluation. Kind of went through all the different guys that are going to be on the roster, and talked about the holes, kind of establishing the need of the offseason. This is going to take it a little further. It's going to bring all the money into it, find out where the team's at with the cap. I'm sure by now everybody's probably heard that it's pretty tight. And then you add that with the limited draft picks, and everyone's kind of wondering what's going to happen. And hopefully by the end of the show today, we can kind of establish that it's not really quite as bad as it looks. There's a lot of things that the Seahawks can do to manipulate those numbers and hopefully put a really solid team together this year. So let's get into it. NFC West news. What did you think of the Los Angeles Rams trading Jared Goff, 2 first-round picks and a third to Detroit for Matthew Stafford?
This was bafflingly dumb. That's what I thought. First of all,
that's a lot of money. You know, I think they gave away one of those first-round picks just to take Jared Goff's contract. I kid you not.
No, and I would actually say that you're right, because getting rid of Jared Goff's contract was imperative, and by
that alone almost makes it a toss-up for me.
They got because Goff's contract was arguably the worst contract in the NFL.
For what you were getting value-wise out of his production versus the dollar amount of that contract and the amount of time it had left on it. Oof. They were going to be hurting. If they had to keep Goff for the next 2 or 3 years as their quarterback, they would have been stuck in this range where they were not going to get any better, I don't think.
Yeah, and that's the problem, though, is they aren't going to get any better anyway. And the reason why I thought it was just brutally bad for them was you take on a big contract. Yes, you get rid of a big contract, but what you don't account for there is all the dead money in his signing bonus that still had yet to accrued onto his salary cap space. So you have to eat that right now. So they got rid of the guaranteed salary, which is why, so by trading him and not cutting him, they didn't have to eat that part as well. But they still had to eat the part of the signing bonus. So between Stafford, who's older, you only got for 2 years, and the dead money, he's now like, that's going to account for, I think it's like 28% of their salary cap.
Yeah. Plus, you got Gurley on there in 2021, dead money of 8,400,000 as well. Now they just had, what was their wide receiver that they got rid of a little while ago? I think that they had some dead money.
Brandon Cooks, they had some dead money, but that
was like $8 million of dead money last year.
Yeah, but that was this last season. It's not right now.
Right,
so,
right. Nonetheless, they're looking at being right now $31 million over the cap.
Yeah, and so you've got with Stafford, all the dead money that they've got from Goff and Gurley, and then Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. You've eaten up over half of your team salary cap on 3 players.
That's brutal. That is brutal for any team to be competitive. I mean, they're looking at trying to retain like a guy like Leonard Floyd and some others.
They can't sign any of them to any kind of deal right now because they're over the cap. They've got to jettison $30 million worth of salary that is currently on the roster, not their unrestricted free agents, people who are currently signed for next year, just to get under the cap. And then you've got to replace all those people you jettisoned and all the people who are supposed to be unrestricted free agents. They are going to have no middle class. They are going to have a ton of people, undrafted rookie free agents, vet minimum guys, and nothing else because they can't afford anything else.
Well, and they don't have a lot of contracts that look like they can be restructured either. They're upside down on 4 or 5 deals as it is right now. I mean, basically the entire top of their roster, Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, all have contracts that if you were to cut them, you would lose money. You would have more dead money than you would save almost.
Yeah. So you end up making your cap situation worse by losing them.
Yeah.
And
so they're in a tough spot.
They're in a very tough spot. And
who cares about them?
You know what? They made the playoffs barely. But they beat Seattle in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And so we do care about them.
Yeah. So, okay. So, well, what do you think? Before we get to the offensive coordinator part of this little segment, we'll kind of transition from the Rams into that. But I wanted to talk about Matthew Stafford for a minute and ask you what your opinion is of Stafford. Is he a guy that just throws for a bunch of empty yards, or is he a legitimate quarterback in this division that's going to make the Rams better and allow them to do things on their offensive side of the ball as far as explosive plays that they weren't able to do with Goff?
Stafford is one of the more underrated quarterbacks in the NFL.
He's only Russell Wilson's age.
Yeah.
I always thought he was a little older than that.
Because he came into the league in 2009, and Wilson came into the league in 2012. That 3 years makes you think, wow, he's been in the league forever. But he came into the league super young. And he's played for, I mean, I know the Jets exist, but until recently, and even recently, the Lions have been one of the worst run franchises in sports, of any sport. And yeah, I know the Jets exist, so they're maybe not number 1, but they're up there. And he hasn't had a lot of talent around him. There was one year when they had a really good defense and he had Megatron with them, and you're thinking, okay, this is a team that could, do something, and they didn't win a playoff game that year.
That Cliff Averill ended in Detroit and came then to Seattle. Yeah.
And that was kind of the end of all of that. They were basically he had a reasonable roster around him once in his time in Detroit, and that is kind of like, that'll tell you why people don't think much of Stafford. But you can watch him on tape, and he makes a lot of throws that guys can't. The guy's got a freaking cannon for an arm. He can rifle things into the smallest windows. That other guys just can't. They just can't get the ball there.
It'll be interesting, because in this offense, I don't think he needs to do quite as much as he used to do. He can play within the offense, within the structure, and still be able to be allowed to have some explosive opportunities, plays downfield. It'll be interesting to see how their wide receivers. I mean, Cooper Kupp's going to be his best friend. That guy's that tandem.
Actually, Woods is going to be,
he's going
it's
to have
probably
improved production as well.
He's probably going to be the biggest recipient of that trade because, Cooper Kupp is who he is, right? He's a guy, a lot of stuff in the middle of the field, underneath,
right.
and that's where he made his living, and he's going to continue to make his living there. But Goff just could not get the ball down the field to Woods. There were so many yards and so many touchdowns left on the field because Goff just couldn't get the ball there. And now he's got a legit quarterback throwing him to the ball. You're going to see a huge increase in his stats, provided he stays healthy. But ultimately, though, the success of that team overall is going to depend on the rest of the talent because those three guys are going to be there, and the stars on defense are going to be there. But if you have Aaron Donald, but you don't have Floyd or any of the other guys around him, doesn't matter.
Their safety Johnson, that guy's going to get paid this year, and isn't going to be from the Rams.
It's not going to. Yeah,
he was one of the best safeties in the league, I thought.
Yep, and they're going to lose the other cornerback opposite Ramsey. They're going to lose two of their linebackers. They're going to lose Brockers up front. Their defense especially is going to be decimated by the salary cap issues that they have. And, we'll see. Yeah. We'll see what they do. We'll see how they put it together. But it's going to be really challenging for them.
Havenstein, is going to be expensive. He's got an expensive cap. Mm-hmm. They can save $5 million against the cap if they release him.
More than likely, though, they'll extend him and save $4.5 million against the cap, and so they save money, but then they also keep the player, and they'll just kick that can down the road as far as his contract.
Yeah.
But that's $4.5 million. They still have $25 million they have to go find.
Yeah.
That you have to continue to get rid of, and so there's going to be other guys that are going to.
I was thinking like some linemen, like Joseph Notebloom and Austin Corbett. Both those guys have contracts that will either need to be restructured or they'll be released.
The thing I would keep in mind is it might actually be Stafford, where the money, the cap room comes from, and that he's got 2 years left. They make it 3 or 4. And push all the money out in years 3 and 4, and guarantee it so that way he knows he's not pushing it out there and then going to get cut and not see it, and then basically pay him nothing this year, except for like a big signing bonus to take that offer for them,
right.
And just push most of his salary cap into next year and get them 15 million or 20 million in cap space.
It already looks like the Rams. I mean, just looking at their cap situation on their top 5 or 6 contracts, and it already looks like they've restructured a lot of these deals to have large bonus monies paid out this year with low base salary. And so I'm not sure if they can do a lot, but at least with their top big heavy duty contracts.
Yeah, because they've already kicked that can down the street already, and it's reached a point where you just can't kick it any further. And that's actually what the Saints are running into down in New Orleans. Is
we'll talk a little bit about Seattle in that way for this year as well. Mm-hmm. Seattle's looking in pretty good shape with regards to contracts and bonus money and base salaries and all that kind of stuff. But this year might be the year where they take out the credit card a little bit. We'll talk about that. But yeah, what were you going to say about New Orleans?
New Orleans has known that their window would close with Drew Brees. And so they have sacrificed their future for their present. And they've done it for the last 4 years because as long as he was willing to keep playing, they were going to put a team around him. But they've reached the point
upside down like 110 million or something like that.
Yeah, they are. It is nuts. And so you're looking at 112 million over the cap, and that is before Drew Brees retires. And the way, because they've used his contract by pushing money out into the future in order to continue to make additions and keep a team around him, they've gone to that, his credit card so many times that him retiring is going to hurt them in terms of cap room.
Yeah,
it's going to be a lot of more dead money than
he's got
his salary.
Almost $23 million in dead money.
Yeah.
But his
When
cap number is 36, so they will save 13 off of that, but it's only 13 out of 112.
I thought it was going to be the other way around, and um, he was going to cost more than he would than the save. Like they would lose cap number by having him.
He's got a $36,150,000 cap number, with a $22,650,000 in dead money if he was released or cut.
Yeah. So what that
and $13,500,000 in savings.
Okay, so it's 13 million total. What they might do is just because of how bad their situation is, they might have him do that at June 1st, and make it a June 1st designation and spread it out. Split it over 2 years rather than one, and eat some of it this year and some of it next year, just because it's so bad and they have to get rid of so much cap much talent.
Quan Alexander for them has a $13 million cap hit with zero dead money, so he's gone. He didn't perform up to his contract anyway, and so he's going to be gone.
Pretty much, you have Alvin Kamara is going to be there. Jared Cook's gone. He won't make it. Most of their veteran players that have cuttable contracts, are probably gone.
Yeah.
So Michael Thomas is going to be there. We know that.
Yeah.
And that might be it.
Well, he's a one-man team. They'd lose money if they cut him.
But you're looking at
that's a horrible management. I mean, just looking at the contracts for the New Orleans and right now online, and it's just a horrible looking mismanagement.
Yeah, Quan Alexander at 13 million will be gone. Ryan Ramczyk at 11 million will be gone. Marshawn Lattimore at 10 million will be gone.
Right.
These are, and then they'll replace those guys. Jared Cook, they'll save 9 million. These guys are going to be cut, but then they're going to have to replace them, but they'll replace them with veteran minimum guys. And these are big pieces of their puzzle. And so it's not just that Breeze is going to be gone. This team's going to be a shell of what it was this last year. So,
and that's going to be hard. They're going to have to be patient in order to make it through, especially if there's no adjustment by the NFL and the Players Association on the current projection.
Yep.
Let's talk about it. Let's get into the Seahawks stuff. All right. So, well, first, I want to talk about Shane Waldron a little bit, the offensive coordinator from the Rams that we hired. And he wasn't an OC for them, but he was their quarterback guy and passing game coordinator, et cetera. And then Andy Dickerson's coming in. He was the assistant offensive line coach. He's been around Shane Waldron for a long time. They talked about going way back to the New England days in the early 2000s. He comes in as the run game coordinator. So he was the offensive line assistant there. So he does bring some assistance for Solari in transitioning our offensive line, possibly some of the attributes that we're looking at, especially with the guards and tackles, as far as being a little bit more athletic, as opposed to a power-oriented, heavier than that you can be at the guard spot, the better, just so you can truck some guys. But it'll be interesting to see if our guys existing on the roster right now can get to the second level and all that kind of stuff. We haven't really been asking them to do that. So it'll be interesting to have that conversation a little bit today. Shane Waldron, let's talk about the hire, the process, and what you think that he would bring to this team, and if it's good or if it's
I think it's great. I think it's outstanding. You're talking about a guy who's been with Sean McVay since day one in the Rams organization. He comes in as their passing game coordinator. He's the guy that draws up plays and figures out how to attack defenses and in terms of the passing game, and loves play action stuff and the way he uses multiple receivers and shifts and movement in order to get guys open and make life easy for a quarterback and all of that. And then you bring in with him, a run game coordinator who will help Solari. And I don't think it's as different than what Solari wants as people would think, because Solari his background is outside zone running. This is a more Alex Gibbs style, whereas the Seahawks have run a lot of inside zone stuff because that's where their talent lied, and the way they had their guards and stuff, just their talent on offensive line, that's where they went. But to run the Rams offense the way that it's been run, you need more of that outside stretch zone in order to pull off of that with the bootlegs and play action stuff the way that the Rams did. And Solari used to run a heavy outside zone, running game before coming to Seattle. So I think that it's actually a good fit. And what you're going to have is you're basically there is going to be a shift in terms of what they want. You're going to see guys like Lou Potty and Fluker no longer being looked at, because you're not just going straight ahead. You got to go side to side. And so there is going to be a shift, but it's not going to be as drastic as people think. To me, what it said was that Ethan Posick's probably going to be back, because he is a very good fit for that style of offense with a lot of lateral movement, rather than asking people to block straightforward.
Interesting. So who do you think benefits the most in this offense from Waldron being hired?
My initial response when you thought that was Russell Wilson, because he's now going to have a competent scheme to work within, one that actually takes advantage of his talents and puts him on the move and rolls pockets away from pressure and does plays that are designed to get guys open and make for easy reads and that kind of stuff. But I don't think that's the answer you were looking for.
Well, I think it's beneficial to have that conversation. Like, what's the offense going to look like with Russell Wilson running it? I mean, if you can imagine Russell Wilson dropped into the Rams offense.
Yeah, it's the offense. What the Rams do is and people may not picture it and say, oh, well, that's what the Seahawks should do. But when you describe what the Seahawks should do with Russell Wilson, it's somewhere either what the Rams are doing or what the 49ers are doing. And those are two of the best offensive lines in the game running those two offenses.
I think it's hard for us fans to visualize what the potential of the Rams offense is, because Jared Goff was there and he has, certain limitations that Russell Wilson just doesn't have, and gives you a little bit more dynamic playability. Mm-hmm. It gives you a closer, in that offense. It gives you throwing down the field and taking shots, explosive plays that just, quite frankly, just didn't come easy for the Rams. Now, they had, a somewhat efficient offense as far as being able to dink and dunk and move down the field. But beyond that, it was a difficult slog for them a lot of the times.
Well, yeah, because they didn't have a quarterback that anyone feared. But you take the Rams offense and you realize that Wilson is more athletic, so he's better running. He is more accurate when running. He's a better thrower on the move. He's got a better deep ball. He's got a stronger arm as far as fitting it into tighter windows. A lot of the limitations that Jared Goff brought to the Rams offense don't exist with Russell Wilson. And so you have a situation where you take the efficiency that the Rams were able to produce with a, at best, average quarterback, right, and then you put a guy in there with some real talent, and you're looking at this is going to be fun. It's going to be fun to watch. And the thing is, and you don't have to do what the Seahawks did the first half of this year, where they dropped back and threw deep every play, because they tried to do that in the second half and it didn't work. But you get there instead by completing a higher percentage of passes, and some of it's dink and dunk and some of it's over the top, and you get your running game involved, and you have that stretch zone game, tiring out defensive linemen, getting them to move sideways rather than attacking up the field, and you generate time for your quarterback that the Seahawks didn't always generate for Russell Wilson at any other point in Wilson's career. And there's just a lot that can be done to make these things work.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, it really is. And they run a lot of looks that are very similar in the run game and the pass game. And they run a lot of 2 tight end sets. They'll have 5 offensive linemen, but they'll have like 8 or 9 guys at the line of scrimmage, all bunched up, maybe with 1 wide receiver wide and a single back, would be Wilson under center as opposed to in the shotgun. And,
yeah, they'll do Wilson will be under center a lot more because it gives them the directionality of having him drop back and turn towards a running back, and it sets up the play action better. Than if he's in the shotgun, then the only real play is inside zone to the opposite side. There's not really much you're going to do in the running game.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was interesting. I mean, they will have their, the tackles, our tackles, like Shell in particular, will be asked to block down and then get to the second level. So he'll rub off on Lewis's man, and then he'll go pick up a linebacker. Is there anything about Shell or Brown at this point that make you believe that those guys aren't athletic enough at this point, especially with Brown, but with Shell to be able to get out into space?
I'm not worried about it.
How about Lewis?
Lewis is,
certainly hired for one job, and now he's going to be asked to do something a little different.
Kind of. He has his talents, right? He has his things. So you design things for the talents that he has. Don't ask him to pull and get out in space and block a defensive back 15 yards downfield. The defensive back's likely going to run around him. That's not who he is. But have somebody else, have Ethan Posick do the pulling, and let Lewis, pick up the guy in the middle. It's design your play slightly different in order to take advantage of the talents of each individual player. I'm not that worried about it. Dwayne Brown is older. I kind of don't necessarily love the idea of seeing him pull and be out in space and having people dive at his knees and all of that. That's not exciting to me. But I'm sure that the team will be smart about it. You don't have to pull him. You could pull Haynes or whoever ends up winning the left guard job and do it that way. And there's options. And I think that we have coaches creative enough to use those options rather than fit square pegs and round holes.
And that's right. And I believe that, and in fact, Waldron said this in his press conference today. A reporter asked him or made the statement that after Bevel left and Shoddy came, that the offense retained about 70% of the old playbook, and then Schottenheimer added to that. And he was asked if it was going to be a similar situation with this, and he, diplomatically said, we're definitely going to take a look at the personnel we've got, and we're going to, maximize the opportunity and the talent that we have, put those guys in a position to be successful, blah, 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 blah. He says, but I've got my thing, and I'm bringing my deal, and it's important that I be able to make this thing my own, but I'm totally going to be incorporating everything, what's been working, we're going to keep doing, and then we'll just we'll add to it. And so it sounded like it's probably going to be, obviously it's going to be a hybrid situation. So, and, something like the offensive line probably needs to be done over a long period of time, like at least 3 years, if they're going to completely transition the blocking style and the plays and all that kind of stuff to fit personnel to scheme. So it'll be interesting to see how they transition that. I'm not worried about Russell Wilson. I think Russell Wilson will thrive damn near in any offense, but this one in particular, I think really does give him the opportunity to maximize the potential that he's got, that he's really good at, like play action, rolling out of the pocket, using motion to get guys into space and all that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to watch that. All right, let's talk about dollars and cents. So why don't you set this thing up a little bit as far as where the team's at, how many folks we've got under contract. What's it look like from the league? What do you hypothesize as far as the league and the Players Association coming together and negotiating some sort of deal that maybe can't be anticipated now, but looking forward to 2022 cap and 23, where there's a lot more money, and having a bunch less money this year maybe doesn't make a lot of sense, and they might try to bridge that gap a little bit.
Well, and that's what I believe is going to happen, is you're going to see that gap bridged, and the teams, or the league and the players union, have to get together and determine what that gap bridging is going to look like, what accountability the owners are going to have to the players to make sure that they don't use giving them more money next year as a way to give them less money overall by the end of this bridging period. And also, with new TV contracts coming in, to make sure that, that's taken advantage of, and all of that. But ultimately, we do know the salary cap is going to come down. We know they're not going to be able to hit the number that they had for this year. And the question is, how far down is it going to go? Is it going to come down to 178 million, which is what the players union is saying be prepared for? I've heard 180, I've heard 182, I've heard 185, all as potential landing spots for that number.
I've even heard 198 again, same as last year, and they would just, try to bridge that out, hold it steady
at 198 for like 2 or 3 years.
Yep, exactly.
And that actually would be the ideal situation for, I think, everybody, because when the salary cap goes down, that means there's less money to go around, and salaries have to go down with them. And it means a lot of people get cut and don't get re-signed, and nobody's happy.
Well, right now they're projecting the 2022 cap to be at $220 million. So that would be an increase of $22 million, and then $250 in 2023. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for them to lower the cap too much this year, displace a ton of players and veterans, and cause havoc in the entire marketplace, when all they would really need to do is just borrow, essentially a little bit from 2022 and 2023 cap space to level the playing field again, and keep all the teams competitive this year.
And if you can get, because all of my stuff, I kind of just assume 185 is going to be where it's going to land. But honestly, that still doesn't make a ton of sense. 198 makes most sense. It makes perfect sense. And it's not just because of the easiness of the finances and spreadsheets and everything, but just simply because if by lowering it, you cut all these players and you get people signed to smaller contracts, because nobody's going to get paid this year. Yeah. Everyone who's a free agent is going to take what is below what they want,
what they think they're deal, probably.
Or even if they sign for longer because they want that security, it's still going to be less than they think they're worth.
Or artificial. Like they'll get it'll be a big number, but it'll be spread out over a couple of years, and it'll be totally a cuttable,
Yeah, they'll have it set up so you play for 2 years and then you get cut. And so that $100 million deal is really a $20 million deal. And right. You're gone. And so, there's a lot of funny money in these contracts in that way. And just looking at it, you can see that, these you don't, as a league, as a players union, you don't want that. As a league, you're not gaining anything by doing it either. You're having a ton of turnover. You've got some teams that have been successful that will fall off the face of the earth, like the Saints we talked about earlier. It just doesn't benefit anyone.
So for the sake of this conversation, let's say that the cap is going to be 180, just because it's an easy number to keep track of.
Okay.
If it's 198, the cap goes up $18 million. We can adjust our conversation and some of the things that we're going to talk about. But let's just, for the sake of this, the Seahawks are at 180. That gives us approximately, $4 or $5 million in cap space this year. That's not going to cut it. That's before the draft. That's before free agency. That's before we've got 48 players under contract. Obviously, you're going to
more.
You need a few more. Exactly.
You need 42 more because you need to get to 90.
Right. Well, I mean, getting to camp is one thing, but getting to 53 plus a practice squad is kind of where you want to land.
True.
So we're going to need a little bit of money. We're going to need a little bit of flexibility. We've only got 4 picks in the draft. You've got to be able to fill out your roster. Some of those folks that we've got in free agency coming up are legit. Chris Carson, Carlos Hyde. Looks like we might lose our number 1 and number 2 running backs, possibly. We've lost one of our starting tight ends, probably a second one in Jacob Hollister.
Starting left tackle, David Moore at wide receiver is a number 3.
Left guard, possibly our center, Ethan Posick, KJ Wright, Benson Mayoa, Quentin Dunbar, Griffin. Both of our starting corners. I mean, it sounds like it's really bad. How do we put together a plan? How does John Schneider put together a plan to maintain a Super Bowl ready roster in 2021, Keith?
Well, the plan depends greatly on whether it's 180 or 198. That 18 million makes a big difference. But ultimately, there are some things that have to be done ahead of time. Either way, no matter what. And you just start looking at the contracts that Seattle has and where they can get some additional spending. Now, we already talked about what's going to happen with the salary cap in 22 and 23. It's going to go up, right? And so with that, Wilson's got a salary of $19 million next year, but $32 million cap space, right? That $19 million, if you convert it into a signing bonus, you have to keep his veteran minimums. You can convert $18 million over. You take that $18 million and you push it into the other years of his contract, and you drop his salary cap number way down. What's that do? It drops his salary cap number way down this year, but it increases it next year. But you have more flexibility and more room next year.
Well, let's talk about what the salary cap is in 2022. According to Over the Cap, the 2022 salary cap is at $141 million.
Yeah. So they have, the way it works is the team has the least amount of cap space of all the teams that are currently under the cap. So there's 14 teams that are over the cap that have to cut players to get under. They're in the red. Of all the teams that are in the black, the Seahawks have the least amount, which puts them about average in the league. It's right in the middle. Next year, they jump to 141 million of cap space. That's going to be one of the best in the league. They have the ability to kick some of this problem into the following year and not have it hurt them. So
right.
They're going to take advantage of that.
They don't want to go overboard, but there is a credit card available if they should so choose to use it, and it looks like they probably would want to.
Yeah, and like I said, the first one that I would do is I'd go talk to Russell Wilson about it, because it's like, rather than taking game checks of $1.25 million every week, here's a check for $18 million, and we'll pay you a couple $100,000 every week as he gets the salary cut to a league minimum, but then just takes all the money now, right? And you're going to pick up 10 million or 12 million in cap space by doing that.
Yes,
of course you're going to. And then, so that's like the first one that you would go to. And then after that, there's actually quite a bit of other players where you can go and find some ways to rework it. Carlos Dunlap's name is going to come up first and most often, because he has 1 year left. His cap number is 14 million. And none of it's guaranteed. None of it's dead. You cut him, you save $14 million instant.
Right. Now you have to make it. First of all, you have to make a determination: is Carlos Dunlap going to play on a $14 million 1 year contract? The question is he worth $14 million of production? And you probably would say no. He's probably closer to Everson Griffith at, say, $8 million a year. So you try to go in and restructure it and maybe give him the first year money, but then the second year is, it's down or whatever.
Yeah.
So give him the bonus money, and keep the base salary low, so his first year cap hit is lower than current.
Yeah. And so what you have with him is a situation where if you need money, you have it. Just cut him and just know that you have to replace him on the roster and hope that you can do it cheaper. And we can go down the list, right? There are a lot of guys. Jamal Adams at $10 million, they can find a way to redo that. Quandre Diggs at 6.1, they can redo that.
Bobby Wagner and Lockett both have big numbers.
I would say Jerron Reed to me would be next because he's underperformed his contract. They could easily save $9 million cutting him or trading him. And, I think you can get his production from elsewhere. But then there are the ones that are a little more unpopular to even bring up. Tyler Lockett, you could trade him or cut him. You want to cut him. He's got too much value.
Or restructure. Yeah.
But you could trade him and pick up a draft pick or two and save $12.7 million against the cap. And when you've only got 4 draft picks and no cap space, suddenly trading Tyler Lockett and getting a couple of draft picks and a lot of cap space is something you'd look at, especially with the way the rest of the league is. And this is why I said that you not knowing what the cap's going to be. Is it going to be 198 or is it going to be 180? Because that 18 million does make a difference. And where it makes a difference is all the teams that are currently in the red.
Yes.
Because all those teams have to cut guys. There is going to be a ton of players that would, in a normal year, would not be on the market because they wouldn't get cut, that are going to be on the market and get cut.
That's why I think the trade market is going to be really difficult this year.
Mm-hmm. And so to me, I was looking at this and I was like, it would be a risk to do it this way. But the Seahawks could go into free agency, just outright cut Carlos Dunlap, Jerron Reed, Quandre Diggs, different guys that have big cap numbers, Trey Flowers, which would save you, $2 million. And then expect, because all these teams are so far over the cap, they're so far in the red, that there's going to be a glut of players with very little money to spend on them league-wide. Supply and demand is going to drive prices down, and that you'll be able to get an equivalent player to Carlos Dunlap at a fraction of the cost. And maybe that's Yannick, who we talked about the Seahawks trading for a year ago, who's going to be out there. And what team is going to have the cap room to sign him? Well, you know who has a lot of cap room is the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I guarantee you he's not signing with them. Right. Given their history.
Right. Well, the current market would be half the team. So your market is literally starts out at half of what it would normally be. And then you just work down from there. So, but there's teams with cap space right now that can create additional cap space, just like the Seahawks. And then there's teams in the black, in the red right now that can also dump some
True,
stuff.
But that's not any different than a normal situation, right?
Sure.
The Seahawks every year go in and they have contracts like Carlos Dunlap's that they can choose to work with, choose to cut, choose to leave alone, and every team has those. But in this year, half the teams in the league don't have options. They have to get rid of those contracts because the league rules say you have to. And if you don't get your team under the salary cap by the first day of the league year, the league will literally go through and void contracts for your players with the biggest cap savings until you're under. So like for Seattle, you'd go through and they would literally void. If the Seahawks were the Saints situation and decided to be like, you know what, we're not going to abide by the rule. We don't care. We're not going to even try and get under the cap. First day of the league year, the league would come through and say, Carlos Dunlap, Tyler Lockett, Bobby Wagner, Jamal Brown, Jamal Adams, all of you are free agents. because they're the ones that they're the top salary cap savings, and they would just void the contracts. They'd become free agents, and
right.
they could,
that's not going to happen.
It's not, but I'm just saying, like that. That's the reason.
Not this year.
That's the way
the teams are under a real situation here, and I think
that's the way. Together. That's the way the rules are, and no team has ever done that. No team in the league has never had to step in and make that kind of deal. But that's what the rules say, and so the PA and the league will come together and they'll come up with an agreement, and whatever team. The teams that are under, they will find a way. Even if the cap
increased by $10 million, like it has every year for the last 7 or 10 years or whatever, it would have gone up to 208. And the New Orleans Saints would have still been almost $90 million over the cap. And so what are you going to do to help a team like that when in a normal year they would have been in trouble anyway? You're not
going to. No, they're not going to go out of their way to help them. They're going to help themselves. The Saints have been mortgaging their future for their present for as long as they could keep Drew Brees in a uniform. With Brees retiring, they are going to be forced into a massive rebuild. Yeah. They got to gut their roster, and it's because of what they did. But you know what? They were able to keep a really strong roster around Brees for the last few years by doing it. And it didn't work out as far as championships, but it sure worked out in terms of games won and playoff appearances and all of that. And I'm sure that, it's going to suck to lose all those players and have to start over, but better to take your medicine in 1 year and get all of that dead cap awfulness off the books and just have one bad year in 2021 and then be back in 2022 with a lot of cap space and probably the first overall pick or the top 5 because you had a talentless roster and be ready to go, right? So if I was one of those teams, that's what I'm looking at as I'm looking at starting over.
So let's do a few predictions here on some of the players that are up for possible release or restructure, and let's make a little prediction, and maybe we can project a little bit as far as how this is going to work. Let's talk about Bobby Wagner. This is a guy that's a future Hall of Famer, been at the heart of the defense since he came on board. Best player on the defense. What do you do with Bobby Wagner? Is he worth a $17 million cap hit? And if he's not, if you determine that he's not, what would be an appropriate number for him that you would retain him and maybe offer an extension so you can get that cap number down this year and give your team a little bit of money? Or maybe they do the trade thing. And what does it bring?
So Bobby Wagner has 2 years left, right? 2021, he's got a cap number of 17. 2022, he's got a cap number of 20.
Seahawks are not paying 20 for Bobby Wagner in 2022.
Yeah. This contract was built around him getting a new deal at some point. Because no linebacker in the NFL is making you might have a 3-4 outside linebacker that their primary job is a pass rusher, right? That might approach $20 million a year, but for an off the line of scrimmage 4-3 middle linebacker, there isn't one in the history of the NFL that's worth $20 million in terms of the salary cap. And
they have a hedge on the team already.
Yeah, Jordan Brooks, his replacement's already there. I look at that 17 and I go, that's high, but $7.5 million is dead money. And that's with nothing guaranteed, which means it's all prorated signing bonus. So cutting him or trading him, you have to eat that $7.5 million in dead money. Yeah, it saves you 10. But are you going to be able to get a player anywhere close to Bobby Wagner for $10 million?
I think that you've got to look at the overall team philosophy, where they're at right now. Where's the defense?
They were definitely up and coming and rising at the end of the year last year.
Mm-hmm.
Do you blow it up? Because that's a blow it up move.
Yeah.
The trading Bobby Wagner for draft picks is a kind of a blow it up. It's over. We're going to reset this thing again. Move, and I just don't know that we're there.
Yeah, I don't think that you can to save $10 million against the cap. I don't think you can replace Bobby Wagner's leadership, how much he's respected in the locker room.
So how do you go to Bobby
everything
Wagner
that he does
and ask him to take less money, objectively and respectfully?
The answer comes into 2023, which right now he has no contract. And you go, okay, let's give you a contract that's going to continue to pay you into 2023. So it's going to be more money overall, but it's not going to be that much more. It might be like $2 million more in terms of total money, but it's spread out over 3 years instead of 2. And you do it in a way that lowers his actual cost and his cap space, but you still guarantee him more money over time. And you got to remember that Wagner's contract, 0 guaranteed for the rest of these last 2 years of the deal. If he
has no injury hedge.
Yeah. If anything happens to him, like what happened with Cliff Haverhill, right? Got a neck stinger, boom, done. No more in the league. Everything's gone. Wagner has no guarantee to see a single penny of what's left of his contract. So if you sign him to a deal, extend it to 23, guarantee a bunch of the money so that way he knows he's going to get it even if he gets hurt, he'll probably take it. And that's what I would do, is spread it out over 3 years instead of 2, lower his per year cost, and guarantee at least the first 2 years of it.
And make 2023 basically voidable.
Yeah.
So how about Tyler Lockett? There's been some there's 3 or 4 guys, Bobby being one, Tyler being another, maybe Jerron Reed, maybe Jamal Adams, being tradable assets that the Seahawks have. There's only a few on the team that I think you could really legitimately get, mid-rounders or earlier for. And Tyler Lockett's one of them, probably a top 20 receiver in the league. If you look at some different types of advanced stats, he could be even in the top 10 conversation on any given year. He's got a almost $15 million cap hit with a $12.7 million in savings if he was released or traded or whatever. What do you do with Tyler Lockett? Is he in a situation with a new offensive coordinator coming in where you might entertain that to pick up, say, a second or third round pick for Tyler Lockett plus the cap savings?
Here's the thing. What's Tyler Lockett's contract look like in 2022? He doesn't have one. Tyler Lockett is going into a contract year. This is his last year of his current contract. And he's looking at he's going to have a cap number of $15 million, $14.95 million. He's also going to be in a situation where there are a bunch of quality wide receivers that are going to hit the open market this year. It's a really strong year for free agent wide receivers. And
in the draft.
Yeah. The draft has also got some great ones. This isn't a great year to be a guy holding out for more money or not taking, if the team's like, hey, let's come in and talk about an extension that keeps you around in 22 and 23 and maybe 24 at lower numbers. This might be a year you actually listen to that. And that's kind of what I expect to happen. I don't think they'll cut him. He's too good, does too many things. He's just such a great asset for the team.
I agree.
And
you have to do something. I mean, you've got to knock that $15 million cap hit down for a Tyler Lockett. You've got to get that into the $9 million range. If you can save $5 or $6 million against the cap by restructuring him and extending him
a couple, 2 or 3 years, I would do that.
And why wouldn't you do that?
Well, and
with Lockett,
you would, especially the money is there, especially for these core players for the Seahawks. You want to hold on to.
See, it's one thing with Bobby Wagner because he's 32 or 33. Tyler Lockett's 29. He also doesn't play a position like linebacker where you just take a beating every play.
He takes a beating, though.
He does because he's little, because he's 5'10", 182. But
yeah,
no, but at the same time,
do you pay him a third contract? I mean, that's the question.
I think you do, but you find a way to make his third contract more palatable than his current second contract, and so you extend him. And add 2 more years to his deal to get his cap number down, because $15 million for a guy who's not Julio Jones or Michael Thomas on the outside, you're not going to. You're not getting.
It looks like the contract was set up in a way where this would be the year that you would do something with it.
It is.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So let's talk about Carlos Dunlap. Here's a guy that's got a $14 million cap hit with 0 dead money. If he was to be released, that's a big, huge chunk of change that the Seahawks could really use.
And the Seahawks gave up nothing to get him, so even if they choose to cut him.
Dunlap is a player that I think that they would really like to retain. He made a huge difference on the defensive line this year. I think he's one of those players that you would love to be able to extend for 2 years, and so a 3-year total, and you would bridge that thing.
He's also
with bonus money.
He's also 32.
Correct.
He's
but I would get him closer to like an $8 million number.
Will he take an $8 million number?
Well, he would either take an $8 million cap number with the Seahawks, or he'd probably have to go find a team that would pay him an $8 million figure somewhere else, because he's not going to get $10 to $14 million in the open market. I don't believe at 32 years old.
So why was he available for a 7th round pick in a trade with Seattle mid-season?
Well, I mean, you'd have to look at Cleveland and what they were thinking. I don't know. Or Cincinnati. Is it Cincinnati?
This is Cincinnati. It was with the Bengals. He has been asking to get paid for a couple of years now, and they refused.
Yeah.
He wanted a raise. He wanted more. He thought he was worth more.
What do you think he's worth?
I think 2 years ago he was worth it. I think right now at 32, coming off a year when statistically he was like not great because of all of the time in Cincy where he was not trying, and then eventually got told to stay home because they saw that he was not trying. I think he's going to have a hard time finding that contract, and taking a 1-year deal, bet on yourself. That'll put you a year from now, when you're 33, going into your 34-year-old year, trying to get a big contract. You're not going to get one at that age. So I think
Do you see the Seahawks releasing Carlos Dunlap for no compensation?
I do. And
I think that they might try to trade him.
You're not going to find
have the team that gets
value.
him agree to an extension before the trade. Maybe.
I mean, they can try that. They can tell him to go
5th round pick or something.
Yeah, to tell him to go find. Tell your agent go find this. Here, go find a place that's willing to pay you, and we'll work it out and see what he gets. And then, or the other thing they might do is to just tell him, be like, look, we're in cap craziness. You got a $14 million cap number. That's
literally 3 times the amount that we currently have.
Yeah. And not only that, but it's literally nothing personal and nothing like, oh, you're not worth it.
Right.
It's, we have to do something.
Let me ask you this. What was negotiated and said between John Schneider or our cap guys when he came on and agreed to this situation here where he's got no bonus money this year and it's just straight salary? Didn't he do something when he came in? He adjusted his salary to help the team out or something. Do you recall that?
I don't recall that. I know that when they brought him in, he was going to come here and play well and build his value because he was going to have an opportunity. And I think that might be it. Is it might be, sure, come in and play, and then we'll let you be a free agent and go test the market and go get whatever you can get. And maybe that's what it was.
Well, I mean, he's not a free agent. Obviously, he's got to get left on his deal, but no dead money.
No dead money. So if they agreed to cut him,
yes,
so that he could become a free agent, that might be what the deal is. And so then it's just not anything. And I can actually see that being a thing. I mean, they traded the 7th round draft pick to get a guy who was really unhappy.
So it's interesting that they would do that in back-to-back years, make deals like that with Clowney. We won't franchise you, and with Carlos Dunlap, we'll release you. And interesting.
But anyway. and the thing with Dunlap is I wouldn't be against cutting him, letting him test the market.
Yes.
And just being like, hey, let us know what you're going to get. We want you back. We'll figure out how to work it with the cap. But just tell us what someone else is going to pay you. And if he goes out and doesn't find a market, then we go, okay, well, you know, why don't you come back? We'll let you pay. How many we'll pay you this. You want to do it for 1 year and you can go back out, try again next year, or do you want to make this a 2-year deal?
So he could either take the $7 million deal up front and renegotiate his contract, eat a little bit of humble pie and stay with the Seahawks, or he can go test the market and then come back, and his market's going to be even more depressed, and the Seahawks will pay him $5 million.
Yeah,
basically. Yep. And it will be depressed.
And it will be because
the way the market it'll completely depend on a guy like Carlos Dunlap to be patient and wait until a team really needs him in August to be able to sign him, because there's going to be, well, I mean, he might get picked up before then, but there's going to be tons and tons and tons of free agents out there early in this process that have been released or cut by teams going through the exact same thing Carlos Dunlap went through. Mm-hmm. And the market's going to have to figure it out, you know, and their premier guys will be snatched up fairly quickly by teams that have cap space, but others will linger for months. Possibly.
But how did it work out for Clowney? That was in a year when the market wasn't.
And this year
in trouble.
There's sites out there that'll still say that Clowney's going to make $13 million this year. It's like, what? No, Clowney's not going to make $13 million this year. Maybe 8.
Yeah, how'd he do in Tennessee?
He did awful. He ended the season with surgery. So there you go.
Yeah, he had a terrible year.
All right,
let's not sugarcoat it.
Another guy that we have a lot of money invested in, but has a lot of money available is Jerron Reed. If we were to release Jerron Reed, we'd eat $5 million in dead cap, but we'd save almost $9 million overall. He's got a $14 million cap hit. Do you pay a defensive tackle with 6 or 7 sack potential $14 million in this defense?
You're not paying him $14 million. You're paying him $8.3 million because that's his salary. And the rest of it is just cap hit because they paid him a big signing bonus when he signed. And so basically you kicked the salary cap problem from when you signed him into this year, into this coming year. And so, but the team is going to look at it, I think, more from a cash standpoint than a cap standpoint and say it's 8.3. This is a guy with 6-7 sack potential in the interior, disruptive guy for 8.3. I think they probably just keep it there.
They keep it, or do they extend him?
I mean, if they can.
I mean, he kind of proved it. He kind of proved his 2018 production. After they fell off in 19, he came back and had a pretty decent year this year.
He had a pretty awful first 6 games. Amongst all the reasons why the offense or the defense was terrible during the first 6 games, Jerron Reed was one of the bigger parts. I mean, all the injuries and this coverage went up. They got nothing out of him in the beginning of the year. And then once they got Carlos Dunlap in there, it was like it lit a fire under Jerron Reed, and he played really well down the stretch. But he had some really awful games.
And there's definitely something to be said about surrounding yourself with good quality.
Yeah. And I didn't really love his signing, like when he was re-signed.
Right.
Because
Well, it was a pretty big number. I mean,
it
was
was,
$23 million over 2 years with
yeah.
$11 million guaranteed or something like that.
And they paid him, based on his 2018 season, and his 2019 season was nothing like it.
Yes.
And so I wasn't really excited with it. I don't know if they really have ever gotten any value out of that. Honestly, man,
They got value this year. I think he was actually pretty good against the run and against the and rushing the passer a little bit and disrupting.
At the end, in the second half of the season, he was. First half of the season, he really wasn't. So it's like, which one are you going to get? I think you can look at this either way.
Well, if we didn't have him, we'd have to replace him, and there's nobody currently on the roster.
No, there's not. And
I mean, even though Puna Ford had a great year in the interior and developed some, disruptive tendencies to push the pocket around a little bit, but he's not Jaron Reed. He's not that level of interior disruptive force. He's more of a run stuffing kind of a guy. Jaron kind of gives you both a little bit, but there's nobody on the roster currently that's going to be that interior pressure like Jaron Reed.
So for the $11.3 million that you would save, no, so I'm looking at the wrong line. For the $8.9 million that you would save by cutting Jaron Reed or trading him, whatever, just to have to get clear off him off the books, can you get an equivalent player for $9 million?
Yeah, I mean, like Kwame Short is out there. There's a couple other guys, defensive tackle guys. Sheldon Rankins is out there. You can probably get him for 8.5. Dalvin Tomlinson, he's only 27 years old. Guy like that, 10 million.
See what I'm saying?
Right.
And so you're
straight across.
Yeah. So the cap savings is $9 million. Can you get a equivalent player?
You can
under $9 million in order to make it worth it.
Well, it depends on the upside. How old's Jaron Reed now? 28, 29? So that's where you're at in the market. You're going to get, a 27, 28-year-old guy.
He's 29.
That's going to be about the same price. So it depends on the fit. And I would go ahead and keep what you know. Reed's been good over time. Take the 2018 and do whatever you want with it. But he's had few injuries. He's been consistent, more or less. Last year he was great. There's no indication that he's dropping off at all. So I would keep him around as opposed to going with an unknown guy.
That's the thing is, so going with an unknown guy, or you have to go with a known quantity, so a veteran player, but you're going to want someone who's, a veteran player is 27 to 30,
right?
Who's got to bring the same production and do so for under $9 million before you make that move.
Right. So you're looking at Jonathan Hankins, Sheldon Rankins, or Dalvin Tomlinson. I mean, all those guys are going to be in the $8 to $10 million range.
Mm-hmm.
Ish.
Yeah.
And they're going to give you similar production.
And I just don't, one of the nice things about Reed is he's been fairly durable. So maybe play that into that. You go, you know what? Better to have a guy that is going to be out there.
Availability.
Yep. And or maybe you look at it and you go, okay, well, if we're gonna do that, and this year is a little crazy, and we got to figure out this, maybe this is the time to offer an extension and say, okay, we'll give you some more guaranteed money. We want to get your cap number down. Play with us a little bit here, and they'll figure out a way to keep him longer term. But I just don't see a way to replace his production
especially this year,
and actually
we don't have
any
draft picks, and
actually save money against the cap. Now maybe they choose to leave it and not extend him because they know that you don't want to. If there's a guy that you're constantly thinking about replacing, keeping him around long term isn't helpful, right? So knowing that this becomes his contract year and he can go find another another team, and you basically push yourself into replacing him next year, rather than extending him and trying to gain, 2 or 3 million in cap space or whatever it ends up being. To say that long term, it's just not worth it. But
so I want to talk about a couple more players, and then I want to talk about draft picks really quick and kind of how this might all tie into that. Dwayne Brown. Dwayne Brown's our left tackle. We really don't have a replacement on the roster, and we don't have first round picks in this year's or next year's draft. So we don't have the tool that you would normally use to get an up and coming left tackle to come into the system. Now we could draft a project later on, third, fourth, fifth round, and there are some guys out there, but
you're not starting him
right
in 2021. He would have to develop and be ready in 2022,
what I'm saying
and worry about it then.
Right. Here's the deal. Dwayne Brown's got a $13.35 million cap hit, with $2 million in dead money, $11 million sitting there. If we were to we've talked about needing money, generating money. Would you extend Dwayne Brown? He's already playing, I think, through next year, right?
Yeah, he's got one more year
and
left on the
a bigger
contract.
cap it next year. So, do you restructure Dwayne Brown and keep him in the fold for another 2 years, so through 2024, so that you could lower some of that cap money this year? Is he a candidate for that?
Yeah, he is, because he's still playing at a really high level. And honestly, I mean, he's 36. Let's not. He's no young guy, right? At some point, this drop-off's coming. But it certainly didn't happen in 2020, which he had one of his better years. He was very good this last year. And, he's got one more year left. He's making $10 million, $13 million cap hit, which is actually low for a Pro Bowl quality left tackle.
He is a free agent in 2022. So Keith, this is his last year under contract.
He's got 1 year left. I would say if you're going to extend him into 2022. Give him 1 more year. So he has 2 years left. And maybe take that $13 million cap hit and you drop it down to 10.
Or even 8.
Yeah, but see, then you're pushing it out.
I know that you're pushing it out a little bit, but maybe you could push it out in the second and third year and have zero dead money in the fourth year.
Yeah, you'd have to do it in a way like that, and knowing that he's at some point. I mean, he's 36. He's not going to play whatever contract if the Seahawks extend him, that will be his last contract.
Well, or we need a plan. We need a succession plan.
Yeah,
with Dwayne Brown, and like I said, we don't have anybody on the roster currently.
No, they haven't even attempted since, other than.
You'd have to use his cap number, and knowing that the cap is going to go up in 22, 23, 24, big time. You could go out and in free agency and get a premier kind of left tackle guy, if you needed to.
Yeah,
but that's not really the right way to do it. You kind of want to bring those guys along a little bit and maybe draft a guy so you could have them under team control for a while, but as opposed to a big huge cap hit for your left tackle. But
so if
you've got to do it.
If you were to say, okay, he's 36, let's go see if we can find a younger replacement for him this year at left tackle. Go look at the guys that are available to be as free agents, and find me a guy that you would rather have.
I tell you, there's one. There's only one. There's only one that I would even consider, and he's been kind of a failure at what he's been doing so far, and that's Cam Robinson.
Yep.
Cam Robinson's 25 years old. He's a left tackle. He's projected to make $8 million in free agency this year. Somebody like that, maybe, but it's going to be a downgrade, and Seattle would have to live with that. And you'd have to figure out if Cam Robinson would be athletic enough to play in an outside zone scheme. I just don't know. Can't remember from the draft a few years ago. But he'd be a guy that I would consider. I mean, I considered that guy in the draft when he came around. So.
Mm-hmm. So here's the thing. And even if you were going to do that, right? So you're gonna save 11 million, but then pay Cam Robinson 8 and gain 3 million cap space. You'd get younger. It would be a downgrade, so you would not get better. Is it worth it?
Well, you need to be able to have a plan again to move on from Dwayne Brown. Dwayne Brown is one injury away, one ACL away, knock on wood, from not being serviceable for you, and you have nothing on the roster.
True.
So you've got to figure out a way to get at least a left tackle, backup left tackle, legit guy that could come in and hold down the fort if something happened to Dwayne Brown. I don't mind paying Dwayne Brown. He's been great. Don't get me wrong. He's a top 10 left tackle in the league still at 36 years old with no showing. Last year he kind of was nicked up a lot. This year they took care of him. He was better. If they can keep doing that, there's no reason to think that he couldn't play for another 2 or 3 years. I just feel better if we had a plan in place where we were bringing the guy along.
Yeah. And I mean, they did. It was George Fant. But he hurt his knee, and then the timing just was off, and they were like, nope, we're going to go get Dwayne Brown. And that was the end of that plan, and they needed to come up with a new one. But, honestly, the $3 million that you'd gain by switching to Cam Robinson from Dwayne Brown isn't worth giving up on the quality of player. Now, if you bring in Cam Robinson and play him at right tackle and give him, so he's
you'd have to take a look at that, Keith, in a combination with freeing up cap space. I know that you're saying it's only a savings of $3 million or whatever, but that's not necessarily true. I think you could even lower Cam Robinson's cap hit to $5 million in the first year by loading up a bonus situation. I think there's a little bit more money there that needs to be part of the equation, plus long term, like the term of the contract. You're saving a little bit of money every year. So I think with the cap going up 2022, 2023, big time, I think that you hold on to Dwayne Brown as long as you can, but I think that you do need to cultivate a better set of tackles on the team behind Shell and Brown.
And I think that you can either do it behind Shell and Brown, or you can, Shell's got a $5.3 million cap hit. 3.3 is, savings, and maybe you turn that. That's one of the places where you go and you let him go, and you bring in someone who can be an upgrade and possibly a left tackle, because Shell's not going to be a left tackle for you. So you bring in a guy that can play on the right side for a year and be your left tackle in the future.
So if you were to generate $20 million in cap savings by some of the deals that we've just discussed, in theory, let's say the cap stays around 190, whatever, right, in that area. And so you've got you've got $30 million to spend, let's say. And let's say that they re-sign Adams, but Adams' first year cap hit is about the same as it is now, so it doesn't really cost you anymore. What would be your priorities in free agency right now?
Right now, I mean, obviously they've got to fix cornerback.
You think they might keep Posick, but we've got to replace a left guard. You might upgrade Shell.
I would say the offensive line's got to be looked at. Pete Carroll even said the offensive line's got to be looked at. But then, you're also changing schemes, and you want to make sure that you get the pieces in place. And they've got so much other talent on offense that they really are a couple of offensive line upgrades away from that offense just being.
Well, I mean,
awesome.
you have to think about running back at this point as well. You've got Rashad Penny, who's completely unproven with a knee, and then you've got Homer, which is not going to run between the tackles for you. Dallas, maybe a little bit, but not the full workload. And then behind Penny, you've got Carson and Hyde both.
What did the Rams do when they got rid of Todd Gurley?
Well, they drafted Cam Akers, but before that, they had Malcolm Brown and Henderson in the draft.
Before that, they went with a running back by committee approach, and even when they drafted Cam Akers, it was still running back by committee until the last 6 games.
Yeah, it won't be next year.
No, it won't. It'll be the Cam Akers show.
Right.
but they made a running game work without a name. And you upgrade the
I don't
offensive
think that Pete
line.
Carroll likes that approach.
He doesn't. But I'm just saying,
Pete Carroll wants to have a bruiser, a guy that makes a statement, inflict their will, as he puts it,
I know,
on another team. And until he gets that,
I think you can.
Marshawn Lynch replacement, he's not going to be completely happy. And I think he's been okay happy with Carson when Carson is available, but when Carson is not available, he's not helping the team. And at the same time that Carson wasn't available this year, you had Hyde that wasn't available. Carson missed 4 games. He was limited and metered on all the other games that he participated in. His per game carries was down almost 5 carries per game in 2020. Carlos Hyde missed 8 games and gave you okay production when he was in there, but he wasn't in there enough to really make a difference. Mm-hmm. And so I think they really want to focus this year. I don't know if they're going to draft like a Devontae Williams from North Carolina with their first pick in the 2nd round. I don't know.
I wouldn't expect it.
A guy like that is kind of a perfect fit. No. There's some running backs available out there in free agency. But again, they've got to generate some money. Is it better that they might have Chris Carson back on a 1-year deal? I don't know if Hyde's coming back just because of the injury situation. I think they need availability, and they need a guy that's going to be able to run through the tackles and kind of be an impact guy. They made a mistake when they didn't draft Nick Chubb, instead went with Penny. Penny just doesn't fit the mold. I never understood that pick. If he was healthy and productive, maybe it would have been completely different for me.
You loved that pick.
Penny is dynamic, but
the
more I thought about it over the years since he was here, regardless of the injury situation, since he's been here, he's just kind of been a soft guy. He's not a guy that's going to take it up the middle for you and gain extra yards after contact. He's just not.
No, but he's a guy that's going to bounce it to the outside and take off.
Let's see where he's at injury wise. I just don't know, Keith. One of those guys you can't depend on.
I think given what we saw, the way that the Rams did their transition and how well it worked, and given Penny's skill set and his ability to bounce it and take it to the house in a way that Carson couldn't, I think what you're going to see, because they also went into this last year knowing that Penny was, if he played at all, it was not going to be till the end of the year. And that's what happened. He barely played, and it was at the end of the year. So they're going to go into the season with a full year of Penny. And they'll go and make sure they have another person, whether it's Carson, whether it's someone like Carson, bigger body, up the middle kind of guy.
They're not going to go into the year with Penny as the number 1 running back.
I think they might.
But they'll also possibly think that, given the track history of injury and so forth.
The track history of 1 injury?
Oh, he was dinged up enough where he missed 6 or 7 games his rookie year with a broken finger. And then, he never got on track. And then this last year, And the year prior, he went out, for the year. And then this year, he never really recovered in time to play. So
it was a nasty injury. He basically destroyed all the ligaments in his knee.
He came on for like 3 games last year, Keith, but he only had 70 some odd carries for the entire year in 2019. So it's just been very underwhelming overall. He's shown glimpses and little at talent. But
he's shown flashes of being of a guy that can be great.
Exactly.
And I think they see that. And in a situation where
if those injuries are legit unrelated to one another and they're just freakish things, so be it. But he's got to be available. If he's not, I don't know how you could go into a year and say that he's the number 1 guy on a team where that's the core thing that you've said that you wanted to improve upon in 2021.
Yeah, but you're improving upon it by scheme and blocking and commitment and all of those things. You don't need you don't need to go get that like one guy and have. I mean, like I said, the offense is being run by someone from the Rams. The Rams had that guy in Gurley.
What do you think
and then
about Gurley?
They
Gurley's
ditched,
27 years old and he's available in free
and he
agency.
can't run.
I know, he's got bad knees.
His knees are gone. So, but
okay,
so
how about a guy like Mike Davis come back, or Kenyon Drake, or James Conner's out there, Leonard Fournette? I'd like that guy, but he might be too expensive for them this year.
Yeah, I'm not interested. Like all of those guys, like I'd rather use a mid-late round draft pick. Go find another Chris Carson.
Like a Trey Sermon.
He was. Chris Carson was a 7th round pick.
Yeah, there's guys.
There's
not
guys
a lot of guys out there that fit that mold in the draft. There's 3 or 4 guys. Javonte Williams is one. He's going to be a 2nd round pick. Who's the Nanji?
Mm-hmm.
He's probably going to go before the Seattle Seahawks have a chance. Trey Sermon out of Ohio State is a guy. Ramondre Stevenson is a guy, but he's a big guy. In fact, he's like 230, 5'11", 230. But I saw him in the Senior Bowl, and he was a little underwhelming. Just lacked some explosiveness and stuff. I thought that kind of took him out of contention, maybe. So there's not a ton out there that fit that 5'11", 220-pound kind of guy that trucks you.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of those in the draft. So
if Leonard Fournette will come in at a reasonable price,
like $3.5 million,
I would take a look at that.
Yeah, I would tandem him. If Chris Carson was available on a 1-year deal at 5.5, and you could get Fournette in at 3.5.
No, I do one or the other. I wouldn't do both.
I would do both because this offense needs both.
And I don't think you're finding.
Or do you think that they go in a totally different direction and have a change of pace guy this year for the first time in a while?
No, I don't think they do that. I think you have your change of pace guy in Penny.
Morris used to be.
No, I think Penny is your change of pace guy. He's the guy with the wheels. He can take it to the house.
Do you think they'd have him lose some weight?
No, I think he's fine.
He's like 230. I
know. He doesn't need to lose weight. He's already got the wheels. But I could see them going. Is see what the market does, and then end up with a guy like Matt Breida.
Mm-hmm. Matt Breida's got wheels.
And have him come in, go with him and Penny as a 2-headed monster.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. But him and Carson would be awesome. I would have Penny as my 3rd back.
There's not enough money to do that. You've got Penny. You used a 1st-round pick on him. You know he can be good. You've got to expect him to have a bigger role.
Going into a season with Penny was my number 1. So let me ask you this. Okay, so we've got, let's close this thing up a little bit. And I just want to talk about the draft briefly. We've got 4 picks. We've got a 2nd rounder and then a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th, or a 4th, 5th, and a 7th. One of the 2.
4. I think it's 4, 5, 6.
Okay. So how many picks do we end up with? And how does Johnson, and do we make an off-season trade here before the draft during free agency to gain picks? What are your predictions of how this thing's going to go, and where do we end up with in the draft? Do you think that Adams comes into play? Adams seems to me personally to be a guy that might be schematically slightly off and fitting the defense, and a guy that they might look at as a tradable asset that would bring in the most trade value.
They did not give up what they gave up to bring in Adams.
But they could get a lot of that back
to turn around and send him off for less.
They only had to pay him like $4 million last year. He barely cost him any money. He just cost him draft compensation. So if they could get a 1st back this year, maybe a 3rd next year, lose the salary cap hit this year of $10 million plus any future hit, which would be probably closer to $17 or $18 million per by letting him go, gaining some
Which you
draft
don't,
capital.
which
If
you
got a
you
mid
don't
first round
need.
pick this year, John Schneider could turn that into 3 or 4 picks and make the draft.
True. And you've made the draft, but you've gotten rid of your most dynamic defensive player.
But you go out and free agency now with that $10 million and you pick up a real nice player. It's a true, strong safety that plays the position in a traditional Pete Carroll way.
Pete Carroll was the one who traded for him to begin with. He's part of the long-term plan. And this future, he's going to cost $17 million in a year. We've spent the last hour of the show talking about how you have to get through 2021 because in 2022 and 2023, the cap goes way up and the Seahawks have $140 million of phony money to play with. So you sign him to an extension that keeps his number in 2021 down, even lower than it is now, and you let it go up in 2022 and 23 when you can afford to pay him, and it doesn't matter. And you keep the dynamic, game-changing guy that tilts the field.
We've had this conversation before.
We have had this conversation. We had it last week with Dana. You don't get better by changing the guys who changed the game for you. You cannot have a defense that's made up of all really nice pieces. You have to have those players that you put the pieces around.
He's just a very expensive piece.
Yeah, but he is that really nice
So
piece.
then you would tie up 30% of your cap with Russell Wilson, Bobby Wagner, and Jamal Adams.
No, I wouldn't. Because what happens is by the time the big money for Jamal Adams kicks in, where's Bobby Wagner?
Well, the cap is going up too. So the percentage is going to stay
The
relatively
level. The percentage will drop down, and Bobby Wagner's replacement has already been drafted. He's already on the roster. Bobby's got a couple of years left in Seattle, unless he's willing to pay for a little less. He's not playing for $20 million in 2022. It's not going to happen.
All right. So to sum this thing up, we have cap issues today, but by the time the free agency rolls around, we expect those cap issues to be mostly resolved. Mm-hmm. We expect the league and the Players Association to probably come together and at least mitigate the very, very worst case scenario cap situation where it stays at like 178 and probably have that come up closer to 190. That way they're only down $8 million for cap. And it's a much easier, smoother ride to get a little bit more space available and actually participate in free agency. And then the draft, even if we kept our 4 picks heading into the draft, I still imagine John Schneider coming out of that draft with 7 picks. Yeah, Keith does too.
You can't. Those of you in the audio version of this can't see it, but as soon as you said that, I had 7 fingers up. I'm like, that's last year was the least number of picks that Schneider's made, and it was 8.
Yes.
This year, I think that 7, unless they make a trade
right.
And it's something where they send Tyler Lockett for a couple of picks or whatever, and I don't expect that to happen either. But unless something like that happens, I expect 7 to be the number. You're going to see them move down in round 2 a few spots and pick up a 4th. You'll see them move down in the 4th to pick up a 6th, and then they'll move down in the 6th to
right.
and pick up.
And they could very well buy a pick in the 7th round if they wanted to.
Like they did
future 7th, right?
Yeah, so they'll do something like that. I think 7's kind of the lucky number, and I think that's not a bad approach because you have a lot less information on this year's draft class than you have in previous years. It's going to be way more of a crapshoot than it ever is, and it's always pretty hit and miss and random. And the draft
this year is pretty strong between the 3rd and 6th round. That 3rd, 4th, 5th round this year is loaded up with some strong talent in utilitarian sort of positions. Linebacker, safety, cornerbacks pretty strong this year. Wide receivers pretty strong. I think running backs fairly weak. Offensive lineman is pretty good as far as depth. is concerned. Tight ends is pretty weak unless you're getting that guy in the first couple rounds. But you can get a good blocking type tight end all the way into the 5th or 6th round this year.
Well, the Seahawks, we talked early on about who was going to benefit the most from the new scheme, and I said Wilson because I think that's the obvious answer, but Colby Parkinson is the guy that I think is gonna you're gonna see, because he's the second tight end. But look what the Rams did with 2 tight ends, and both their guys were huge, and I think both of their tight ends outproduce all of Seattle's tight end room.
I could see Tyler Higbee getting cut, or I could see Gerald Everett become available in free agency and have the Seahawks pick him up and pair with Disley and Parkinson to have a really nice trio. And you need that in this offense, I think. And Gerald Everett is used to being in line as well as being able to be a pass catcher, and he would pair really nicely in 2 tight end sets with Disley.
Yep.
And both be threats in the receiving game. And then Parkinson's going to be a red zone guy this year for sure.
Yeah, I would say keep it when you're looking at free agents that the Seahawks might go get, right? The guys on offense to watch for are gonna be people who are with the Rams last year. Because
or in similar offenses.
Yeah, but you're right.
Under the Shanahan tree.
Yep, because those guys are the guys.
Atlanta, some guys have been hanging around Atlanta for a while.
Yep.
The Rams, San Francisco runs a similar set.
Gerald Everett, Malcolm Brown. Those are the types of guys that you can see, because they're going to come in. They know the system, they know the scheme, they know the terminology, and it just helps everyone around them figure it out and learn it faster and get up to speed. So
yeah, I'm gonna have to go check the Los Angeles Rams free agent sheet and see who's available. Might cut.
It's not a long list right now. It's actually pretty short, but they're way over the cap. They're going to have to cut a bunch of people.
Right.
So
all right, well, we need to get going. So
we do.
Thanks for joining us today. Make sure you come back next week. We have special guest Rob Staten on from his blog, and he does a podcast over with the Seahawkers occasionally and field goals. And he's going to be on the show to talk Senior Bowl prospects and other draft prospects coming out of college this year, and start the conversation as we build up towards the draft. And we'll start with all those kind of guys and position groups, and we'll kind of go through Seattle's roster, figure out what we need, what we might be looking at, who fits the Seahawks best, and we'll talk about the new offensive coordinator and the changes there, and what we might expect as far as how that changes how we look at prospects and so forth. So anything else, Keith, and we'll get out of here.
No, let's get out of here. This has been a long show. Good show. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah. So find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. I'm at NW Seahawk. The show is at Hawks Playbook on Twitter. SeahawksPlaybook.com has all the shows. And subscribe on your favorite podcast app and find us on YouTube. So until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.